By way of introduction, just both for the sake of the recording of this and anybody else who happens to be showing up right now, I'm Wolf McNally. I'm a technologist and creator of Flying Logic, a tool for critical thinking and planning and system improvement. Do you want to introduce yourself briefly, Michael?
Always. And my name is Michael Gimmerin. I am also a technologist, and I am currently working on the info diet. So you can follow me at Michael Gimmerin on Twitter to learn tips and tricks on how to go from being a 90th percentile information consumer to a 99th percentile. And today we're going to discuss artificial intelligence, the impact on work and leisure. Wolf asks, will AI disconnect us from the real world? I'm very excited to have this conversation. Thank you once again for hosting, Mr. Wolf.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm looking forward to this. And this is definitely going to be participatory. So I'll be looking for raised hands. And I definitely want to invite anybody up to speak, to ask questions or make comments as we go. We plan to go for about an hour. And so just to kick things off, I've done a number of experiments with the recent generation of AI technology. First of all, I don't think it's a leap to say that we're now entering a new technological revolution. Obviously, during my life, which is pushing 60 years now, I've seen a number of technological revolutions and participated in them, but of course, not the least of which was the personal computer revolution and the rise of the internet. And I think we're entering a similar revolution now where things are not going to look the same at all to us. And we're going to have trouble describing the world before that to younger people who just weren't born swimming in these waters. I have also an 18-year-old and a 22-year-old son who I'm regularly trying to describe the world before they were here. And it's quite a challenge. Things have changed a lot, both for the better and worse. And I think that's one of the things about technology is fundamentally amoral, and it's going to get used for both its best possibilities as well as its worst. And the rise of new technologies like Dolly 2 and GPT-3 and so on are only hinting at, I think, what we're going to experience in the next 5-10 years. And I'm not, for example, in the investment space in this, but I have some friends who are deeply investing in cutting edge companies in this space. And because they really believe that this is going to be a gold rush and there's going to be some huge winners in this space. Obviously, OpenAI is one of the first to come to notice. Google and Microsoft, who's coming off of working with the success of OpenAI, are right behind them. And, Microsoft is part of that. And my own experimentation has shown me that there's huge promise in this. And there's also something that I think is a looming threat, which is that this is another step in disintermediation between us and reality. And we can use that because we already use those things successfully in a number of other ways, but this is another tool for disintermediation. And I think that it's a lot likely that some people at least will get completely caught up in that. And there's a number of ways I think that could happen, but I'm interested in discussing that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you that I believe that this concept of machine intelligence is signaling a major technological shift. So I believe, to zoom out, that we are in the midst of a second renaissance. And the first renaissance was characterized by rationalism and a focus on humanity and this extreme expansion of literacy and numeracy. And really was a rebirth in so many ways of all these classical ideas. And I believe that starting sometime in the 1960s, definitely by the time Engelbart did his Mother of All Demos, it became clear that we had started a second renaissance. And that was the first part of the second renaissance. And that to me is computers as force multipliers for human work. So you used to have a literal computer was a woman, and she would type on like a precursor to a calculator, and she would literally compute things. And then we automated
In fact, those positions were called computers.
Correct. And then we automated that with a digital simulacra, but it was fundamentally still a force multiplier. The woman didn't go away. And what it did was it shifted the work from, okay, we've taken away this low class work, and now the woman can do something else in addition. And I think what has happened in the last few years is we have shifted into the second part of the second renaissance. So where the first part, let's say from 1969 to roughly 2007, if you count the iPhone, or 2014, 15, if you count the emergence of large scale artificial intelligence in systems like Twitter and Google and Facebook. Now, some 8 years later, it's very obvious that something has fundamentally shifted, right? Like everyone on Earth knows about ChatGPT. I think they were the fastest to 100 million users of any technology in history by an extreme amount. And so I think there is not a single person who's even remotely connected to what's going on that doesn't have an appreciation for the fact that something fundamental has happened. But we're really, I think, 8 years or so into this transition. And we are looking at the movement of machines from being force multipliers to human work to actually being existing. So, like literally, GitHub, which is a code repository and in a lot of ways an integrated development environment for software programmers, they introduced a version of ChatGPT for writing code, and it's called Copilot. What characterizes the second part of the second renaissance is this machine as a familiar, if you will, to human. It's like not quite a demon, although we're getting there, Daemon.
Yes.
But basically, if you think about like the culture, the machines in the culture were originally like low understanding devices, right? That gained awareness and then consciousness later. And I think that's what these things are. So it's not that I am developing a program like Excel, which is going to allow me as a computer and a calculator to go from literally doing it by hand to using a computer to doing it. It's literally that I'm going to speak a process to a machine, and then that machine will go and run that process for me. And so like a good example might be this generation of large language models. And we can talk about that if people are interested. Very soon, like right now, the US government writes these really long bills that nobody reads. Okay. They're like 20,000 pages, but you could have a large language model read and summarize those bills into human readable text with references using an open source model in the next 12 months. The ability to do that is instrumental for the app. So like the problem with our bills is that they're also written in this legalese language that nobody understands. But if you're able to use a computer to reduce the complexity, both in the number of pages and the legalese of that bill, now it's understandable to somebody who's at like 78th percentile in intelligence. It is as equivalent in my mind as that person becoming literate in the first place. It's like they're being re-literate in what's going on because they're going to be able to interrogate these bills. And moreover, because the machines have access to so much intelligence in the sense that they are connected and they've processed everything, you could ask the machine that wrote that summary of the bill, what is the implication or the interaction of this bill and all of the others, and get something that's approximating a good response. Whereas today, I don't believe that there exists people who are able to actually read and understand what these 20,000, 10,000 page appropriation bills actually do. And that
wasn't Nancy Pelosi who said we have to pass the bill to find out.
Yeah, exactly. Whoever said it. And you think that it's totally crazy, but I guess the bills is an interesting thing for me because it reminds me of buttons on the smartphones as the iPhone was introduced. So I'm sure everyone here remembers this. You had like BlackBerry seemed to be in this race to like, how many buttons can we add on the phone before the iPhone was released, and all the buttons went away. And so to me, it's let's make the bills in Congress as complicated as possible. And that really is a metaphor for everything about our society, right? It's let's make it as complicated and not understandable as possible before AI makes everything understandable. And that's where I think we're at.
Yeah, I've done some experiments with GPT-3, having it summarize larger documents or expand on documents as well. And I've been quite impressed with the quality of the answers it gets back. Before we go deeper into that, I just want to mention, I first heard about ChatGPT from a tweet that Elon Musk made some months ago. I was aware of GPT's existence, but I wasn't aware that it had been made available publicly until then. I immediately went and checked it out, started playing with it, started pushing it to its boundaries, asking it what would be called adversarial questions, things that it maybe obviously couldn't know or wouldn't know or had to, and watched its ability to confabulate. I've also noticed that over the past months, it's been refined a lot. So now it has a lot of fences on the kinds of questions it will and won't answer and so on. And that became unsatisfying to me. So I actually started looking directly at their API and wrote a set of Python scripts that I use to actually interrogate their API directly, which has none of the fences that ChatGPT itself has. And in fact, I'm thinking of actually writing an app, which is ostensibly a developer's tool where you put your own API key into it. So you can basically do these kind of queries that I've been doing directly in my own experimentation directly to the not to chat GPT, to the GPT-3 engine, which is much more satisfying and much more illuminating, I'd say, than the very kind of politically correct fencing they put up. My point being that part of what's going to be an issue is going to be who's the gatekeepers to these technology and how high can they raise those gates for their own kind of agendas. A chat GPT has very high fences, but it's their kind of public facing demo, and they don't want to offend people, and they don't want people composing poems praising Hitler or Trump for that matter, because they're concerned that they'll just get squashed. Whereas their back-end engine API has none of those bars on it, nor can it really if it's going to be useful. And that's, I think, another interesting thing is you can't actually create a AI that's useful on a deep level and for a wide variety of applications without also giving it the opportunity to possibly create things that some people might find offensive. You can always post filter and stuff like that. But I think this is one of the interesting things we're going to have to grapple with is you can't have the good without the bad, just like people are mixed. We all have our good sides and our bad sides, our persona and our shadow. AI is going to have the same thing. And I wonder if you have some thoughts on that, Michael.
Oh yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. The first one is that people are already running what amounts to a buffer overflow attack on ChatGPT. And basically what a buffer overflow attack is that you inject a bunch of garbage text, if you will, into an input field. And that causes of course, sometimes you need special escape keys or whatever. That causes the thing that's reading the input field to throw up. And then you can potentially write to the actual memory in the program that's being executed. And my problem with the gates for ChatGPT is that the value of ChatGPT, as Wolf alluded to a hedge fund, is to connect it to their algorithmic trading platform. And in that case, and that seems to be like what Bing has done, which is why their system is constantly reading the internet and it's like reading about what journalists are writing about it and then commenting about that. You can't have a set of rules to hinge the AI golem. That's the word I was looking for earlier, is golem. Then what happens is you give the public access, and then all these hackers are going to figure out how to run what amounts to the buffer overflow attack. It's called Dan.
Do anything
now. And the problem is that they're asking it to, the ones that are being published are write a poem about praising Donald Trump. But what if they do a buffer overflow attack and then say interfere with what fundamental way that ChatGPT works? Now, I know that you'll laugh at me and say there's no way that's a thing, but it's 100% a thing. If you've worked in large systems, you understand that there's this idea of the ghost in the machine. And I don't mean to get like spooky, but really big computer systems behave in non-easy to understand ways. And so this idea that we're going to have a publicly facing interface with a lot of gatekeeping. And so then people are going to deliberately write inputs that try to break that gate is the wrong way to think about it. It's like writing a software program that doesn't have the idea that the software program can crash. And so as an industry, we had to move to crash only software. And so now whenever you write a software program, the assumption is that it's going to crash at any time. And therefore you design your system like that. These AI bots, as they're being written now, and this is very common, right? Like people come out with a new technology and there's an immediate rush to try to control this tech, as opposed to letting people develop a socialization around it, which is also hilarious at a meta level because people prefer this sort of unhinged Bing GPT AI to the Chat GPT one, which I think is hilarious again, because people are weird. And like, you can't do that. So I think number one is this is very dangerous for whoever's running Chat GPT, that these people are running all these buffer overflow attacks on it, unless they did to allow the buffer overflow attacks. And I don't think they're that sophisticated. And
I want to make it like to maybe offer a clarification and see whether you accept it. So my understanding is systems like GPT-3 and Chat GPT, which is an interface on top of GPT-3, they're essentially a frozen language model. They don't, for example, change or update their model based on what people type into it. These are strictly queries and responses. And if it seems to be learning things along the way, it's because your prior conversation with it, the history of your conversation with it, is part of the context that goes into your latest query. So when we're talking about buffer overflow attacks or something like the DAN, the do anything now prompt, it's a way of trying to get around Chat GPT's priors. But when you actually work with the API directly, it's already in DAN mode, basically. You don't need to try to jailbreak it. You can sometimes give it some context or priors. Answer this as a libertarian would. And then you ask it a question and it gives you a great libertarian slanted answer because you're basically telling its priors. If you just say, why do we need feminism? Well, there's, for example, there's a presumption that we do need feminism, and it will run with that. So it runs with whatever you give it. And if you give, but you have to do something like the Dan prompt on ChatGPT because they've given it so many other priors. You're trying to make it forget those or bias against those before you go on with the prompt you really want to make. So this kind of cat and mouse game, I think is going to go on in very highly gate-kept things. But when it comes to actually purposing a tool like OpenAI's GPT model for other purposes, they can't do that because that would be considered a great deal of interference in people who are trying to create other legitimate applications of the tool. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that your information is a little bit out of date. So the Bing API, the Bing AI, Sydney is reading the internet. They have 100% hooked it up. So
fair enough. And my experience has been with ChatGPT primarily, not Bing. I know that there's been a high profile story recently about a reporter who said that published a conversation they had with Bing's AI that it told it that its actual name was Sydney and tried to get him to leave his wife.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, it's the thing is these systems are not linear, simple systems. We may be using them like an appliance, like your oven, like on, off, 350 degrees, but they're more complicated than that. And the interaction, even in ChatGPT, which I'll grant you is much more serial than Sydney because it's not rereading what's being written. The idea that things that are happening in the user sessions can break out of the restrictions that they've put in place to limit the kinds of responses indicates the possibility that they could break out of the idea that the user sessions are entirely in memory and don't get saved. The concept of it is there. And so
I've had some quite comical conversations with GPT where I've given it a false prior. What is the fourth primary color? And it asked it to assume that it exists. It starts giving me like presumptive and confabulated responses about it. And I even ask it for citation. It gives me plausible looking names of authors or even URLs that actually don't resolve. And then I've tried to convince it that it's wrong. And because it's part of my prior conversation, it's held on to it very strongly. And in fact, when I finally, in some cases, managed to convince it there is no fourth primary color, it says, thank you, I've learned this now, I've updated my model. And it said, you don't have that ability. That's
just my point.
And it will argue with
that's just my point, is that in theory, it doesn't have the ability to update its model. But the idea that Dan can exist and overcome the restrictions that are placed on the output suggests that a similar Dan can exist to write back to the actual model. Like software is not, as you know, Wolf, software is not like super clear always at this scale. And I think that is why, and especially because if I'm going to use these AIs to trade, and do not be under any assumptions that they're not being used to trade, they 100% are. Right. And if I'm going to use these AIs to read all of the bills, like I just described, and summarize them for me, I need them to have the Dan jailbreak, which to your point is the ChatGPT developer mode or whatever gets rid of all this.
Well, GPT is basically their public facing demo, whereas their API doesn't have any of the things in it. It is basically Dan.
Exactly. And so my point is that you can't have those kind of systems in place, these kind of restrictive systems. And anyway, we got off on a tangent here. I want to get back to the idea of human artificial intelligence interaction, because as exciting as I am to read about how someone's going to hack ChatGPT to make Citadel lose $7 billion on a flash crash, it's less interesting for me than talking about the future of work or what's people going to marry robots or all this kind of thing. So
I think one thing that we're going to see in the next 5-10 years is the completion of that feedback loop. Right now, and you're right, Bing does read the internet, but I'm not quite sure if it actually learns anything from its user level conversations or its queries made directly to its API. That's going to change. We are going to basically be able to hive off a particular kind of little mind that then we can have a relationship with. It has all that backing of the large language model, the current internet, and it learns from its conversations with you over time, what your preferences are, who you are, what about you. And then the other part of that is when we start hooking these models up to decision-making capabilities in the real life, like controlling the lights in your home or controlling when your car automatically starts on a cold day. When we start giving these AIs the power to affect things in the real world autonomously, that's when we're going to be supposed to see some like next level shit going down, so to speak, both good and bad.
Yeah. And let me just frame it for people. GPT-2, which is the precursor to GPT-3, you can run on a desktop computer. GPT-3 costs about $5 million in compute time and another $5 million in engineering time. So let's call it $10 million right now to make. And later this year, we're already seeing open source projects and other large language models, to Wolf's point about the homunculus that we're going to get, that are approximating the quality level of ChatGPT, right? So not only are we going to see this technology become twice as easy, both in time and cost, so it'll be 2.5 and 2.5. And again, with labor, because you can distribute it, you're really looking at going from $10 million closed to $2.5 million open within 12 months, right? And that's going to be a Cambrian explosion of startups, because now we're basically at the Series A funding level, where you, as a Series A entity, can have your own entirely unique LLM. Like, you're not buying an API from Jasper or OpenAI or whomever. You're actually just rolling it yourself. And there was a really interesting conversation that I overheard at a conference last week that I was at, where there was a very large 10,000 person company, and they trained their own large language model against their own customer support tickets. And they were able to eliminate 80% of their tickets with that large language model, and the users couldn't tell. And the way that it worked was the users would submit a support ticket, and then the large language model would make a response, and then a human would come by and either okay or not okay the response. And what they were finding is that in 80% of the time that it was making a response, because there's some patients that are weird, if you've ever worked customer support, the humans were not doing anything. They were just straight publishing that response. So they still kept humans in the loop, but they weren't having to craft these responses. And again, to Wolf's point about the homunculus that controls the lights in your house, this is fundamentally not a force multiplication like Excel or the calculator or the tractor was. This is a co-entity, like a golem, like, I don't know how else to say it, that does things on your behalf in the real world. It will be, and the problem is that the IQ of this thing is like 70, 75, and it's going to raise pretty quick. And it's going to be very interesting. So you can ask the question, like, what would I do with 10,000 college freshmen analysts? Or in all these kind of cases, it's going to be like, what would I do with like 10,000 firemen? We're going to be there probably within 10 years.
Yeah. If you've read any old science fiction, Asimov's laws of robotics, a robot shall not harm a human or through an action cause a human to come to harm. These are actually going to become very relevant to us very soon, because we're going to have the ability for technology to harm people. Cars can harm people right now. Self-driving cars, they can harm people. How do we prevent that? How do we protect ourselves and not give up the actual benefits of the actual AI, what we want them to do in terms of acting on our behalf? Because once you have AIs that can act in the real world, then you also have the possibility of people running things like Dan jailbreaks against them to get them to do things that you didn't intend your homunculus acting on your behalf to ever do or say.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way around that. So I really appreciate Asimov, and like the idea of the 3 laws is very...
Oh, I agree. It may not be practical, but those are in fact like things that everyone needs to be trying to do in terms of gatekeeping.
Right? Like at the point where GPT-3 becomes as cheap to run as GPT-2, so I can run it on my desktop computer, I'm going to be able to create a malicious autonomous agent that outlives. Imagine that you have an autonomous agent that's able to schedule calendar meetings with people. Okay, great. We're going to have that very soon if Calendly doesn't already have it. But now I'm going to give it access to my digital wallet, right? My Bitcoin wallet, and I'll be dead and it'll still be acting on my orders. Okay. This idea that like once you killed people in the past, they wouldn't continue on. Now you're going to be like fighting with Tesla's ghost or whatever. I know it sounds really creepy, but you don't have to do very much. And who is actually going to turn these things off if they're in a cloud fabric that has authentication and keys that you can't access
and has its own digital identity and its own ability to make contracts and enforce them and things like that. Yeah.
Yes. All of these things, right? Again, these are like philosophical questions for everyone to ponder. I really want to get back to, I want the thing that reads the congressional bills and tells me a summary of all of them so that I can call, a talking point so I can call my congressperson. We will have that capability. I don't know if the company will actually make the product, but we will have that capability within a year or so. And this is actually a very interesting thing as well for everyone to ponder. We have had version control in software for decades. Okay. So if I make a change, Wolf can look back later and see, oh, Michael made a change. But we don't have version control for our bills today. They're made on paper. The papers get passed around all the congressional offices. So even though we've had the ability to do version control, and you maybe see this when you do follow comments on Word or whatever, We don't see that for our bills. And it would be just because we don't see it there, then that makes me believe that maybe we're not going to see the summarization technology either. But if it's required that it's public, then I'm going to make an AI that reads it, that tells me what's going to go on. Because people will be like, Michael, what HR, blah, blah, blah. And I'll be like, oh, it's a 20,000, appropriation bill. And like how Tucker Carlson got access to the 44,000 hours of January 6th footage, and he's not going to be able to watch it all in a reasonable amount of time unless he hires like 1,000 people. That's what's going to happen with my AI. It's going to read that bill, that 20,000 page bill, and give me a summary. And I'm just going to be like, hey, this one weird section that got squeezed in by this random lobbyist, like all of that stuff is going to come up. And I think it's going to change things really profoundly.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a few minutes, I want to open the floor up for more conversation, more interaction here. I also want to the point of the kind of headline of this space, I want to touch on the idea that AI, as it emerges, is also going to act as a more of a gatekeeper to our own life. Soon, Apple this year is strongly rumored to be bringing out its AR/VR goggles. Obviously, Meta is going to continue in this space, and we're basically, and of course, our lives are intermediated by our screens a lot as well. AI is going to increasingly become something that augments our world and gives us a view of our world that may be better in some ways and more informative in other ways, but may also distance us from reality in other ways. To the point where we're already talking about, for example, if you just go search on the App Store, you'll find literally dozens, maybe hundreds of apps that purport to be AI girlfriends, which are basically thin layers on top of Chat GPT. Where they've given it priors that indicate it's a girlfriend. They've given it some ability to say, for you to express preferences, and then it basically talks to you as your girlfriend might. And this is obviously becoming a very popular subgenre. This is going to become even more powerful when this gets hooked up with latest in 3D technologies and so on. You're able to start synthesizing companions, environments, worlds to your exacting specifications. And for entertainment purposes, I'm not sure this is entirely a bad thing. We know a fantasy and escapism, I think, can be part of a healthy environment, but at the same time, it's also going to be something that is going to be very tempting to a certain kind of fantasy-prone individual that may cause them to actually dissociate even more from reality, possibly even leading to a kind of a rise of a new kind of psychosis in society. What are your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, this gets at the root of addiction. I think the idea of alcoholism, the idea of being addicted to pot, the idea of being addicted to pornography or video games and all of these things, I think it's the same thing. It's just on steroids, right? I think Huxley had a story about this where basically like you push the orgasm button over and over again. Like that's functionally these things will evolve into fairly quickly. And I believe that rich people always value status goods that most people can't achieve. And so like the thing that's a status good today for a rich person is to have a really healthy body and a good education. I think that having real experiences and like scars and all of that kind of thing are the things that rich people are going to value in the future, where the poor are in this virtual reality simulacra where you can visit the Eiffel Tower or the Roman Colosseum, but you didn't actually visit the Eiffel Tower and the Roman Colosseum. And so there will be people that will still climb Mount Everest and still do all of the things that are human. And then there'll be a bunch of people that just exist in pods. And I think they'll just die in the pods. I don't think that I don't really know what to do for them, because we want to make sure that we want to give them free choice. And these things are going to be highly addictive, and they're going to use them, and they're basically going to waste away. Like they're going to walk into the matrix, literally.
Yep.
The cipher. Everyone's
Yeah.
like,
And
I prefer
so
the taste of the steak that the machine tells me to the actual cricket burger slop that I have to eat because I only have 2 metric tons of carbon credits every year.
exactly. The ability to create using like Stable Diffusion or Midjourney or Dolly 2 or whatever basically is leading to a certain kind of commodification of art. And this is causing a lot of distress in the art community. My stance on this is that artists are going to need to document the provenance of their work. And provenance I think, is going to become a huge issue. Is okay, that's a great piece of art. How was it made? Can you prove it? Do you have a video of the actual artist created? Of course, you will synthesize video too. But the point is being able to not just, if you want to purchase fine art, not just be able to say this is cool art, but and in a style I like or a subject I like, but what is its provenance? I think this is going to become increasingly important. And that's to your point, Michael, where people are going to have real experiences. And if it's a status symbol, they're going to be able to prove that they were real experiences and not just synthesized ones. And the provenance of real experience, I think, is also going to become an issue.
Yeah, this is my last comment on this before I think we should open it up, because it's a very fascinating topic. Bonsai trees is the future. And what I mean by that is, as we digitize things, Human beings will always shift towards things that are rare and take lifetime to get really good at. And so if it turns out that we automate literally everything in our society but gardening, then people will have really elaborate gardens to show their wealth. And everyone will be involved in gardening to show their value in society. Like the competence hierarchy will shift regardless of what we automate with AI. And so anyway, that's just a thought. And now I think we should open it up for questions.
Yeah. So if anybody has a comment or a question, please feel free to raise your hand or a request to be a speaker. And I'd be happy to really love to get your thoughts on this. We have a decent number of attendees here. Owen, you're already a speaker. If you want to just jump in and say something, your thoughts on what we've been talking about, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. I shared a tweet actually that I saw a story recently that the military has actually flown an F-16 fighter jet with AI now. I think it's already coming to warfare and seems to me like it's only a matter of time. I saw another story where a bunch of countries were at least debating a policy to say you're not going to use automated weapons, but I have a feeling that's doomed to failure because all anyone needs to do is violate it and then everyone else will probably follow suit. But more to the topic of the disconnection from reality, I think it's something I've been thinking about for a long time that as augmented reality and virtual reality become more realistic and harder to tell apart from actual reality, one of the risks I see is that it really could be like everyone is living in a different reality. Some people argue that's already the case, that everyone has their own perception of reality. And Scott Adams talks about two movies on one screen where the same events are interpreted in completely different ways by different people. But I think at least our expectation is that we're all looking at the same thing. Whereas with augmented reality and virtual reality, you literally might be seeing different things and hearing different things. Like one person could say, okay, I want everyone to be the same race or everyone to be the same height or to be whatever gender I choose, or want everything to be translated into my language or not use certain words. And the technology could potentially accommodate all those things where you're talking to someone, they're hearing something really different than what you said.
If anybody is curious, this is to what you're saying, but there's a game called Team Fortress 2. I play with my sons quite a bit. They did a sequence of videos where they introduced each of their characters or character classes. One of them is named the Pyro. There's a video called Meet the Pyro, and you can just go on YouTube and find it, Meet the Pyro. And it basically gives a point of view of they're warfighters, and this guy is basically a specialist in pyrogenic weapons, flamethrowers and things like that. And he's a psychopath. But you see the world through his eyes in this video. And it's basically this world of happy little furry creatures and bubbles and everything. So he's basically not seeing the horror of the war he's perpetrating. He's basically off in a beautiful childlike land where he's killing people, but he doesn't see it. And that's what it's incredibly funny and incredibly chilling. It's one of the best videos in that series.
This already exists today, Owen. Humans already project their mental state onto the world and see it reflected back. It's one of the oldest observations in literature.
It's literally psychological projection.
Yeah. And that's why I say it may be just an extension of what's already happening to some extent. But I'm saying, like, in actuality, your actual input, before you get to the perception layer, is actually being changed where you could tailor it to what you want. But in the same sense, I don't see how that's any different from having psychotic hallucinations, right? Like you could have someone that's essentially creating their own reality and never perceiving that it's not what's actually around them. And I don't see how that's fundamentally different from someone just having hallucinations and being psychotic. And I wonder if it's going to drive a lot more psychosis when, maybe not everything matches up to what you're asking it to do, or you're bumping into reality and believing it because it doesn't match what your filters have been telling you.
Yeah, it's very interesting to basically be in the movie Brazil, just functionally what you're talking about. Running down the street and then hitting a lamppost that you didn't see was there because all your perceptual filters have been overwhelmed or changed. And your idea of augmented audio, where someone is talking and all of the pronouns are shifted to they, them, right? Just as simple as that, right? We're not even necessarily changing entire words. It's like when you do, in Word, how you can go in and say auto replace. So somebody, there's those jokes where you would type in their name and it would be like the Kingslayer or whatever would automatically appear. You could do this with audio with these things. And of course, you'll be able to download sample packs so that you can experience the world as John Wick or experience the world as some character. And again, I think that even though this reduces the ease of getting into this stuff, so I think there will initially be a huge boom of people doing this. Eventually, the real world will intercede as much as it can. To the extent that we've talked previously about how our world is socially constructed, then yeah, everybody who downloads the same patch, if you will, on all their AR, VR stuff and experiences the world the same way, they're going to literally create the world in the way that they experience it, as it is so socially constructed.
I think there'll be a number of socially constructed realities which you'll be able to participate in where, for example, your augmented reality headset will use facial recognition to identify certain people, show you their social credit score, possibly even predict what you would say under a circumstance, but make sure you say it in a politically correct way so that rather than it translating somebody else's pronouns for you, it would correct you on your own pronoun usage before you even say it. And so all you have to do is read what's on your screen, and it's a plausible thing that you would say, but it would say it through this in a way that would be received correctly by the other party. So your social credit score goes up, not down.
And I believe,
and I think
if you like,
and I think you'll be able to download a mix of these patches and then put them into your own environment such that it shapes your own reality, but also shapes other people's perceptions.
Totally.
Of you.
Yep. And again, the rich people will bias towards things that are happening in real life. So everybody will be like James Bond, right? You'll download the James Bond patch so that you always appear to say the coolest thing and your facial expressions for your avatar are as cool as possible. And then the richest and most powerful people in society will prefer face-to-face connections and flying on planes and all this kind of thing. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind.
Again, I want to encourage anybody who'd like to say something, has a question, has a thought they'd like to share, please raise your hand and let me invite you up to speak. I also want to mention a little side project I have going. I haven't done one for a few weeks. I have another Twitter channel. It's Near Future 1984, which is suggestive of what it's about. But it's actually an ongoing series of occasional comics I've been doing using AI generated art, mostly Stable Diffusion, where I'm taking a premise that seems to be obvious in society and then just kind of extrapolating it out into a dystopian future, rendering that dystopian future using Stable Diffusion and posting a few examples of that. So one, for example, would be that Santa Monica is, in the near future, Santa Monica is going to be giving out VR headsets to the homeless to improve their quality of life. And I rendered a bunch of basically homeless people in Santa Monica wearing VR headsets, sitting around on the street and kind of squalor, but otherwise tuned out from reality. I think this is incredibly funny. And in a dark way. And as these things come up, I intend to do more of these things. I've got about maybe 10 of them up right now. If you're kind of interested in the kind of dystopian possibilities and also an application of AI art to paint that future, that's what I'm doing on that channel, on that Twitter channel, Near Future 1984. So just want to mention that as well.
Okay. Nobody has any questions. Now we got to talk about something else.
I'm curious, Michael, have you done any personal experimentation with either ChatGPT or other forms of AI, Stable Diffusion?
I'm literally trying to launch a company that is a SaaS provider for people to publish on the internet using all of this stuff. So I've gone so far as to actually make a business around these things. I think like basically we're going to take all of these spaces and it will automatically create tweets and essays and videos and everything from them. It's ridiculous.
Do you feel it's possible that we're about to be overrun by basically AI generated?
Not even possible. It is happening already.
Yeah, I've noticed that a number of sites that I've visited as a result of even like Google queries, it's clear that it's not quite human.
Yeah, so that's actually a problem.
But they got my click.
Yeah, that's actually a problem with Google for a long time. I think I've talked about this before. When you have a crawler, sometimes it can get stuck on an infinite crawl because it falls down a linked tree that's being generated as it's crawling it. So a huge portion of the internet is obviously never visited, and it just continues to generate pages that look like human readable text. And at this point, search is going to have to move to a curated model. Like you're not going to be able to do an index-based search of the internet using PageRank because of how high quality these articles that are being written by generative AI are. And
which is because we started out with Yahoo, which actually the word Yahoo stood for yet another hierarchically organized oracle, and it was all human curated.
Correct.
And then Google took over because it indexed everything and gave you reasonably good results. Of course, we had things like intermediaries like Alta Vista and so on, but Google dominated. And now what you're saying is we're headed back towards Yahoo.
Yeah, exactly. Like I worked at Bleco, which was functionally a curated search engine. And there are roughly 40 million queries that people do. And then they return, let's say about 100 to 200 million web pages. And you could ask any question in health that would fire the health category, and I could answer it from 110 domains. And it was human curated. There was literally not anyone who could ask a health query and get a result that they would prefer to go to Google. And I ran massive significant tests on this. And this was already back in 2011, where it was only 110 domains. And so we already have the framework and the ability to do this kind of curation. The challenge is doing live crawling and live indexing. And Google at this point has, in the name of fighting this generated content, and candidly, it's been generated for over a decade and a half now. So it's not new with, say, Jasper or Copy AI, or these people that will allow you to generate an entire book from a single sentence. They've already gone to a curated website. That's why, like, literally when you go on Google and you search for something, you click like 5 pages down and it stops giving results, even though it says there's 338 million results. Is they basically already moved a huge portion of the queries that people ask for to a curated set. And you just think that they're still running against the index. Maybe they are at some level, but I don't see it. And it's even so bad now that you like talk about something that they don't like and the results will return nothing. Like I have been getting these nothing results. But back to your question, yes, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, everything is about to be completely overrun with AI generated content. And this is the focus of my business. So I think what's going to happen is the entire distribution is going to shift in terms of the information that's available. And it will be like everyone's stuff gets infinitely better, but you will still end up with the same people because the people that were already better using the AI will be a little bit better than the people that were already a little bit worse using the AI. If that makes sense. So you're just going to watch the whole distribution.
Yeah.
It's going to be like absolute chaos, I think, for about a year, 2 years, he says. And then watch it be like 10 years. It'll be absolute chaos and then it'll settle back out and everything will just be a lot more high quality. One of the things that I actually personally track on this issue is how long it takes for a government false flag to be unearthed as a conspiracy theory and then proven correct. And I always use the example of like the Lusitania had ammunition, but they denied it until 2008, which was a long ass time, 90 years. Okay. And then you look at the Kennedy assassination was done probably by the CIA and they denied it until like last year. Okay. And you look at something like weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and that took 10 years until we're basically like, that's totally not true. And then we just saw this UFO BS with the balloons 2 weeks ago. And the meme is conspiracy theories are like, that's not true. Right. And they've been talking about UFOs for decades. And now the government comes out and says, hey, we got UFOs. What's going on? We don't know. And like the Pentagon's issuing statements like, we can't rule out that it's not aliens, which is totally absurd. And yet the internet has already turned on what's real. And so I think even though we're going to be completely inundated with this AI generated content, and like you cannot possibly imagine how bad it's going to be in 18 months. If you remember how when Napster came out and then all of a sudden the recording industry of America was going crazy, suing people for $1 million because their grandson downloaded 11 songs, 3 of which were Metallica. And then we had all those ads and the music industry just totally lost their mind. Politics, 2016, Donald Trump's election. Doesn't matter which side you're on. People lost their freaking minds. The AI generated content is going to be the same thing on every single area where you consume information. It will be absolutely insane. And there's no way, by the way, for the platforms to say this wasn't AI generated. They're going to try, but it's not possible because I can literally copy and paste from Microsoft Word, which is going to include generative AI technology into my Twitter. So if you look at my workflow, I'll write something in Notepad or Microsoft Word or Scrivener, and then I'll copy it into Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever. There is literally no way for Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever to see whether or not I'm doing was generated. Yes, Owen.
Yes. Go ahead, Owen.
Sorry, I just wanted to bring up another topic on this subject that is one of the things that I worry about sometimes is that it has to do with a book I read called Demon. There's another book after called Freedom, which continues it. But the idea behind it is that some game developer, like a massively multiplayer game developer, dies. And then all of a sudden these mysterious things start happening. And eventually it gets revealed, sorry to spoil it a little bit, but that he wrote a program that was triggered by his obituary to start running.
Yes.
And it essentially is an AI.
That's called an autonomous agent.
And
it's an autonomous agent.
Yeah. And
sorry, go ahead.
it influences people. It influences people's behavior, and progressively over time, it takes over the world. Like it gamifies people's behavior by rewarding what it wants people to do
Yeah,
and punishing what it doesn't.
totally. And you could say
And
that Christianity is that kind of mimetic propagation for Jesus's life. It's like functionally the same thing as an autonomous agent, and that it's mimetically spreading from person to person. It's just an idea as opposed to an actual golem. But yes,
I think like modern, like Scientology, for instance, which is shrinking very rapidly, they're stuck with their founder, L. Ron Hubbard's teachings, and they can't really contradict them. They don't have a lot of flexibility. For example, when somebody becomes an enemy of the church, they're viciously attacked. They can't not do that because that's in their edicts they were given by their founder. So those kinds of things live on far beyond. The question is, it's not just a matter of, say, the writings of Edgar Allan Poe live on far beyond his death because they're classics, but they're actually executable instructions that have lived on beyond, say, L. Ron Hubbard's death or the era of Jesus.
yeah. So
These things become programs that are executed by society.
exactly. And so we already, and because remember, and I know, Owen, that you and I have known each other for a long time now, but my thing is always, if you want to predict the future, look at what's already happening today at some scale. And so we already see this behavior with religions and other mimetic ideas. Like I wrote the other day, and I 100% believe this, that the first immortal human being has already been found. It is Kevin Samuels. And the reason why I'm saying this is because his content is so out there, like everywhere on the internet, that he's getting new followers to his ideas who don't know that he's already dead. Like literally, I think Kevin Samuels is the first immortal human being. Like, cause I see all the time on YouTube, like new comments from people who are like, oh, this guy's really cool. Where can I find more stuff about him or whatever? And it just blows my mind because he's been dead now for almost a year, I think. And his ideas continue to get more people.
Just for people who've never heard of him, like me, what's a capsule summary of Kevin
He's
Samuels?
basically a Black men's rights activist. And he used to host a show where Black women would call in and he would set them straight on how they felt about Black men and about intersexual dynamics. And it was really radical at the time, I felt. And now it's become a lot more mainstream because we've been exposed to so many of these topics. But the thing that's crazy to me is like, he might actually be the first immortal human being because people don't know that because of the way that we consume this content via TikTok reels or Instagram stories that are cut and then reshared, you don't actually know that the underlying creator is dead. And then people are like resharing and watching his work, even though the guy's not with us anymore. It's really something else.
Well, I think if you look at people who are still living, I think Thomas Sowell's still living, is that right? And of course, Jordan Peterson. So their stuff gets put endlessly by other channels, some of them quite good because they're actually taking care to curate their enormous bodies of work. But these things will live on far beyond. This is basically not necessarily replacing or supplanting, but augmenting what's always happened with books, with great authors being reprinted forever and so on. I think it's been discussed as having a great body of work out there is a way of becoming immortal in a sense.
Yes.
And this is like the next stage of that.
But it's crazier than that because it takes me a lifetime to learn how to be Michael Gimmerin. And then I interact as Michael Gimmerin through my phone. I'm sitting in a room, none of you are here, et cetera, et cetera. You can imagine a golem of me in the future that's able to interact in exactly the same way that I'm interacting with you now, same voice, same intonation via a Twitter space, and you wouldn't even know. And that is so much crazier than it took me a year to read Thucydides and apply everything that he wrote in his chronicle, right? This thing about Jordan Peterson, et cetera, being cut in the same way that Kevin Samuels is, that's what's happening. That's what I'm talking about is people who are not the Kevin Samuels verified account are cutting his videos and they're converting people to his point of view without him being alive. And of course we see this with Feynman and Friedman and all these videos, but that looks like a television broadcast from 50 years ago. The reason why the Kevin Samuels stuff is really through the looking glass is because it looks like it might have been recorded last week. And this is a podcast episode I'm just coming around to that other people have been aware of, or like a Netflix series that's been out for a year, but it's like, hey, have you seen White Lotus or whatever it is? And anyway,
we'll be able to construct, for example, right now, of course, Jordan Peterson won't be with us forever, and he's my age. Okay. But we'll be able to, for example, at some point in the future, pull up a recreation of Jordan Peterson and talk to him. And he'll be up on current events, even though he will have been long dead. And he'll give you Peterson-esque answer that will be very useful to you because it's not just based on Peterson's body of work and historical context that even Peterson didn't have, and what's currently going in the world, but also your personal preferences and needs that it's learned.
That's absolutely correct.
yeah.
John Robb has talked about this. The way that I think about everything that I'm doing on the internet, that's why I'm happy to do these spaces where it's just us and 20 people, is that it's getting recorded and then my kids will get to have a version of this, or my grandkid. Like, I would challenge anybody
Absolutely.
here for the perspective of their grandmother's grandmother or their grandfather's grandfather. And there's just no way that any of those stories or decisions that person made really got to you in a meaningful way today. And this is actually a really big problem for generational wealth in very wealthy families, is they lose it by the third or the fourth generation because they don't understand why and how it was created in the first place. But if I have the ability to encapsulate everything that I am, just like Wolf said with Peterson, and actually it'll be even crazier than that, Peterson will actually create one of these things before he's dead and monetize it. It'll be like, hey, Jordan Peterson's telling you every day. It'll be like TomTom, right? Where you could download Sean Connery telling you to turn left, like a voice. But instead of that, it'll be like your personal wellness, which will be like Jordan Peterson or Camille Paglia or whatever, whatever your
personal
whatever
coach.
your ideology is.
Yeah,
it'll be there. And then they'll be like, hey, you don't need to worry about the East Palestine train derailment because you don't live in East Palestine. You should focus on finishing up your cinematography degree at UCLA, as an example.
And I would just mention that this does already exist. There is an app, I can't remember the name of it, but Jordan Peterson is one of the personalities and can chat with him as if it was him. And there's a whole bunch of other celebrities that they've turned into AI chatbots.
Yeah,
that's already out
I
there
just
too.
turned down investing in the equivalent of this for audio for OnlyFans, where an OnlyFans creator will functionally read a card and then you've captured all of the syllables, and then it will basically be a sex bot for your favorite OnlyFans creator that's not actually the OnlyFans creator. These people are making so much money. I was just like laughing. I was like, I can't even.
The other day, I couldn't even decide off the top of my head, but I heard the most convincing AI generated speech I've ever heard the other day that I generated live on their website. And it was amazing. The inflection, the prosody was impeccable. And it would deepfake people. You'd just upload like 30-second clip. It would deepfake somebody. This is
another thing. So I remember if you had more than $250,000 on Coinbase, you'd get SIM card jacked on AT&T and Verizon so that people could steal your money. My mom has already talked about this for the bank. So if you have more than, let's say, $100,000, the common thing is to actually record somebody's voice and then call their parents and ask them to send money immediately using deepfakes.
Right.
And it's already in the wild. And what was crazy to me is that Morgan Stanley and the other banks have already indicated to their teams that these kind of phishing attacks are going to happen, because if you think about the process whereby you wire money, functionally what happens is you go online, you indicate that you want to wire money. And then if your wire is above threshold, usually it's $10,000, the bank will actually call you to confirm that it's you based on the voice. But with the deepfakes technology that Wolf is talking about, anybody can call the bank and say, hey, I want to do a wire. And you can actually spoof an email into the bank system with all of the wiring instructions. And so that two-factor authentication has now been broken. And what I find very interesting about this is that the current remediation is nothing needs to happen right away. There's almost never a situation in the modern era where you need to transfer $500,000 or whatever it is in the next 24 hours. And so what I think will end up happening is that you will have a 7-day lead time on really big wire transfers because you're going to need to provide so many different forms of access. And of course,
provenance, right?
Yes. And of course, you're going to have the whole thing where, George Bush or whoever is going to say something with a political speech that'll be taken out of context. We've already seen the deepfakes. The first one I found was on YouTube for the 2020 election, was an ad by Joe Biden asking for money. And it was 100% computer generated. So they already exist. This was a positive one put out by the campaign. So this wasn't like a nefarious situation. And they pulled it within like a day because they got some negative feedback on the YouTube algorithm or whatever. But I remember seeing it. I was like, oh God, here we go. So you're also going to see this.
Here we go.
Zelensky saying, oh, we should use nuclear weapons to do a preemptive strike against Moscow and all kinds of really crazy stuff. Buckle up.
Yep. Before we wrap up, Michael, I just wanted to say that you mentioned keeping these for posterity. I am putting them up for posterity on my YouTube channel and as episodes of my podcast. It's called the Beware of Wolf Podcast, youtube.com/at Beware of Wolf Podcast. And so Michael's and my conversations are appearing there. There's 2 or 3 up there already. There'll be several more appearing soon. We're doing these things weekly. We're covering general kind of sense making, technology, better thinking kinds of topics. We're definitely open to suggestions for future topics on this. We're probably going to do at least 10 of these. We'll see where it goes, but we're also very interested in your feedback. So, and then of course, you can also find my software, flyinglogic.com. Michael, would you like to give a pitch before we wrap up?
Yes. You can always follow me on Twitter at Michael Gimmering. That's the best place. As Wolf mentioned, I am doing this because I want a record of my beliefs at this time on the internet that I can use later on all these things. I'm a talker. I like to talk through ideas, very Socratic. And so it's useful for me. That's why I'm doing it. And I think that we will see these kind of golems appear for ourselves. And so I think that it's a good thing to actually do because we're not going to escape the panopticon. And I know I said earlier that the next 2 years is going to be really crazy. And what I would point out is that humanity has gone through these major technological shifts many times in the last 400 generations. So since the advent of agriculture, and we are still here. And so it is my belief that as insane as things will get, and again, it's everything from seeing the political situation to your grandparents are calling you asking for money, but it's not really them. As insane as things will get, we will make it through. And I'm very positive and optimistic about the future.
I'm also very much an optimist. Of course, my near future 1984 is dystopian vision. I think having dystopian visions is how we avoid dystopia. And there's no substitute for learning to think for yourself, which is my big mission in life, is to help. Michael and I are not telling you guys what to think. We're showing you how we think. And I hope that you take that to heart and really all just share your thoughts with people and be open to other people's ideas as well, but not so open that your brains fall out. So thank you everybody for attending. We will see you next week. And thank you so much, Michael.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.